case you haven't heard, the first volume of my comic, Aurora, is getting a print release, like, soon. Like, really soon. Like, way sooner than it feels like it should be happening. If you're interested, you can pre-order it. It's on Amazon, it's on Barnes & Noble, bookshop.org. It's in a bunch of places. Way more places than I thought it was gonna be. Also, if you're interested in it, the entire comic can be read online at comicaurora.com. But I will say, the print version is extremely shiny and cool, and it feels really, really wild to be holding it in my physical hands. So that's cool and fun. And, yeah, this is a very short promo. On to the video. Hello, everybody, and welcome to a non-Marvel related detailed diatribe. I know, groundbreaking, strange, and shocking. I had no idea that there was media out there that didn't fit into one of, like, 3 major zeitgeists owned by Disney. Anyway.
We deal with books written before the 1900s and media made after 2000. Nothing in between.
Yeah. You're telling me this book was written in, checks notes, 1968? That's square in the middle of stuff we don't normally talk about. What's going on here? But yes, this has turned into something of a contentious subject matter for this detailed diatribe, which I'm excited to see how this plays out, because normally when we do a detailed diatribe, on some level, we loosely agree on the thing that we're talking about before we start. And this one's an interesting, it's just for context, of course, those of you who may not be aware, The Last Unicorn was a book written by Peter S. Beagle in 1968. It was also turned into an animated movie by Rankin Bass. This detailed diatribe is about the book. But when I suggested to you, hey, for homework, would you like to read the book or do you want to just watch the movie? You were like, I'm pretty busy. I think I'll just watch the movie. And this has made my job very difficult. But I won't speak over you. If you wanted to give your first impression on how you thought of the movie, which, just as a side note, did rewire the brains of quite a lot of people, define some art styles.
Red suggested that I could read a book for homework for this detailed diatribe, and I politely told her absolutely not. I don't have that kind of time right now. So I watched the movie, and it did almost nothing for me. And I am willing to be convinced. That's why I'm happy to be here today. This is part of what the detailed diatribe format can accomplish. We don't always have to start at the same place. Part of the joy is in the journey.
Yep.
But I was able to mentally compare this to my experience watching the Rankin and Bass movies for The Hobbit and the third Lord of the Rings. I don't know the mechanism. Someone else did 2 of them. It's weird and confusing.
Right.
But the Rankin and Bass, The Hobbit, and I was able to appreciate as The Hobbit, like, oh, if I knew what they were doing here and, knowing from the book, oh, it's really cool to see this represented. Oh, this is what so-and-so looks like before we had the kind of, Peter Jackson version codified in the original Lord of the Rings movies and then the Hobbit trilogy after. So it's like, oh, it's neat to see this thing I know represented in a very, very condensed form. And this is probably my first experience with The Book is Better after a whole, middle school and high school of what is everyone so upset about? I think the movies of these things I've never read are fine. Watching The Last Unicorn, I've clearly gotten to the other side of the fence because I watched it and I'm like, I don't vibe with this at all. And I didn't want to say that it's bad. It's just that I feel like this movie, as a movie, was very tonally inconsistent across the board. We have this very ethereal, oh, unicorns are gone from this world, and this very, fucking Phil Collins Tarzan-ass intro music. And then there's this most obnoxious character, this butterfly, who's doing modern jokes. He's singing songs from the 50s. I wanted to rip his wings off. It was so obnoxious. And I told you, this butterfly sucks, and you're like, yeah, he's gone in a second. I'm like, thank God.
Yes.
And then the tone kind of settles down after that, but it was so much to take me out of the experience that I had such a hard time getting back into it afterwards that it just felt like shit happens. Evil king, shit happens, oh, the bull's back. And I know that there is a degree to which adaptations have to kind of play this game and choose how to construct their narrative, and I'm sure we'll get to this, but my struggle with this that I want to find an exit from, hopefully in the course of this detailed diatribe, was that whatever this movie felt like it was putting down, it was only putting down for 5 seconds at a time, and then some other random bullshit happens that completely took me out of it.
Yeah.
So help me, Red. Help me see the light, because this movie and this book rewired a generation of people. I don't see it.
Yeah, the stakes have never been higher. Yeah, so I actually had a similar experience. The Last Unicorn was not a book that I read as a child. I became interested in the movie because I'd seen some stuff from it. I noticed that the animation it kind of didn't really look like anything else, because Rankin Bass has this very distinctive art style, but it doesn't really lend itself well to pretty things, like everyone in the Rankin Bass Hobbit movies is an absolute grotesquerie, so like what the fuck's going on there? But then it's like, oh, so this is what it looks like when they try and draw pretty people. That's very interesting, actually. And I watched it and I was like, okay, I can see why this would have rewired the brains of a generation of young artists who were watching this thing. It's got this sort of weird ethereal vibe, but I wonder what the book is like. And then I looked up the book and I was like, oh, that's where the magic was hiding. So the thesis of this slideshow is going to be about how the book and the story in general uses the concept of reality. And unfortunately, this is something that almost did not make it into the movie in almost any conceivable way, because it's something that's woven into the prose. So from my perspective, this story, I would describe it as self-aware. But when we say that a fairy tale is self-aware, normally that conjures up visions of, Shrek and like Telltale's The Wolf Among Us and Into the Woods and things where the fairy tale is sort of the butt of the joke and the characters living in it are on some level, pointing and laughing, winking and nudging and all that jazz. Isn't it funny that we're making such a fuss about beans, et cetera, et cetera.
That's interesting, because I really didn't vibe with Shrek either when I was younger, and I still don't now. Into the Woods I can kind of deal with, but the second act is just wacky and weird and everything goes to shit.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the reason that I struggle with these kinds of fairy tale adaptations of this isn't your grandmother Ethel's fairy tale. It's it feels like it's embarrassed to be the genre that it's in a meaningful way, which is unfortunately the problem with a lot of media that deals with an established kind of trope.
Yeah.
But it makes it extra hard for me to get into this because I have experience not liking this kind of storytelling, and I see what you mean about it's coming at it from a different angle, but usual fairy tales with knowledge of the genre just kind of gets up its own ass a bit rather than saying something terribly new. And I might be pissing some people off here, but continue and we'll see. I just wanted to stake that there.
Yeah, well, no, I think this is a very interesting point of comparison, because I've also been rather, vocally frustrated with any genre that seems embarrassed to be what it is. My first ever punching bag in this dimension was the Christopher Nolan Batman movies, which seemed humiliated with the prospect of being superhero movies. And having now seen a singular Christopher Nolan movie I liked, I've finally watched Inception, I understand why he was embarrassed to do superhero stuff when he could be doing techno thrillers instead. But yeah, fairy tales especially, I think everyone sort of grows up steeped in this culture of the Andrew Lang fairy books and little picture books, the Disney movies, the big adaptations of the Hans Christian Andersen stories. And then, we become more grown up and we're like, I would never care about something as dumb as a little mermaid who wants to become a real girl, or a little wooden guy that wants to become a real boy. Certainly those won't resonate with human experiences in strange ways. So it becomes a very easy, low-hanging fruit to take potshots at. And I'm not saying that that's what these are doing. I mean, Shrek kind of pulls a very heartwarming story out of the subversion of the fairy tale trope with hey, what if the prince that came to rescue you was the thing that you were told was a monster? That's actually a profoundly deep story. Into the Woods has this really interesting undercurrent of yeah, these people are all bound up in stories, but also they're struggling to be good people and not repeat the mistakes of the past. And it's about parenting, it's about bad parenting, it's about what happens when the narrator dies and the story goes off the rails. So there's depth and nuance in these self-aware stories. But when I say that The Last Unicorn is self-aware, I do not mean that it is wink wink nudge nudge, this ain't your grandma Ethel's fairy tale, shout out to Grandma Ethel. I mean that it is very aware that it is a story, but also that the story is the reality for all these characters. So I have on this slide a selection of things you haven't seen because they didn't make it into the movie, but they are snippets from the book. These are basically just quotes that I thought were distinctively demonstrating what I was saying about how this book works like it knows that it's a story, but not that it thinks stories are dumb. When the unicorn leaves her forest for the first time and encounters a human out on the road, she obviously has seen humans, she's got a long and storied life behind her, she knows what humans are, but she runs into this random farmer, and she's like, oh, perfect. This is a story that's played out several times. That man knows what she is and knows what he's for, and he's for hoeing turnips and chasing something faster and more beautiful and better than him. And from the unicorn's perspective, this is the way of the world. It is the nature of humans to be not as cool as she is and to chase her and to fail to catch her. And then she's kind of startled because what turns out is happening is the farmer can't see that she's a unicorn. There's a bit of a perception filter thing that's affecting the way that people see her. Most of the time they just see her as a very beautiful white horse, but they can't see that she's actually this ethereal thing. And that pisses her off so much. She's like, well, if he can't even tell that I'm a unicorn and better than him, there's no point. She gets mad and runs off. And there's so many points in the story where like a character will be like, yeah, I know what's going on here. You're this trope, aren't you? Schmendrick the magician is briefly captured by a team of literally like wannabe Robin Hood LARPers who aren't actually pulling off the Robin Hood thing because it's really hard to steal from the rich. Like they have guards and like castles and stuff. It's so much easier to steal from the poor and then like pay taxes to the rich because then they don't come with their guards and their spears and drive you out of the forest and kill you and stuff. You know, being Robin Hood's not easy, and Captain Cully and crew will be very upfront about how hard it is to be Robin Hood. But if you just tell enough stories about how cool you are, like Robin Hood, maybe people will eventually start to believe it. And when Schmendrick runs into him, he just immediately like fakes that he's heard of this guy by rattling off a bunch of like classic broadside ballad tropes, and he's like, yes, exactly, that is for sure exactly what happened. So
I'm sure the captain's like, oh, thank God.
Yeah, he actually...
He's drinking my Kool-Aid. He's buying my hype.
He initially assumes that Schmendrick is like a secret like balladeer in disguise and is like, oh, let me tell you all 37 of my awesome cool stories about myself. It's interesting. And there's one part that I think very cleanly demonstrates this, which didn't make it into the movie at all, but was brought up in our friend Dominic Noble's Lost in Adaptation video about it, which I also assigned you as homework.
Which I did watch.
Yes.
Yep. Good video.
Because there's this whole town that is, living at the foot of the evil castle of evil that they deal with in the back half of the book, where there's a prophecy that the person who will defeat the evil king would be born in this town. But you see, this town really kind of likes that not happening. Their economy's pretty good. Their farms are good. Everything's great. And the stress of knowing that they are going to produce the hero that will someday destroy the king has led them all to be like, obviously the reasonable thing is to simply not have any children. And then somebody has a kid and abandons them. And the guy who's telling the story is like explaining, yeah, I found this child and, it was a snowy night, but all of these stray cats had just showed up and were keeping the child warm. And so the person he's telling it to was like, oh, so obviously you took the child in and you adopted the child. And he's like, I chased the cats away and left the baby to freeze to death. I know the birth of a hero when I see one. And she's fucking furious with him. And it's just like, there's all these things happening. Everyone in this story is so aware of the tropes of the world they live in, but kind of in the same way that we're aware of the laws of physics. It's not like, oh, womp womp, another birth of a hero. It's more like, oh, I see, gravity's still working today. And by the back half of the story, the characters have kind of all figured out what kind of fairy tale they're in. And it's just kind of like, okay, I guess we gotta ride this sucker to the end and see how everything works out and hope it works out well. So essentially, when I say that The Last Unicorn is self-aware, I mean that it is simultaneously self-aware and extremely sincere about the tropes it's discussing. And this is the part where I just shill for the book itself, because when I read this book, I was like, oh my gosh, this is doing something I have not seen. I like fantasy as a genre. I have read and I've watched a lot of fantasy stories, of fairy tale reimaginings, varying degrees of self-awareness, genre savviness, sincerity. Lord of the Rings is completely sincere, but minimally genre savvy. Nobody in that story really, like, the characters that are clicked into the mythical side of things are just sort of playing them out very straight. Like Aragorn, a one true king. It's not like he's like, oh, one true king's so last season, and the hobbits are not genre savvy about the mythical story they're getting dropped into. They're genre savvy about how things work back in Hobbiton, aka normal ass rural England. So they're all very out of their depth. Into the Woods is wholly genre savvy and only infrequently sincere. You could make a whole chart of these. I didn't, but you could.
I think a good way to fit Shrek into this is that the plot twist at the very end is that it is sincere.
Yes.
But up until that point, it is not.
Everything about Shrek and Fiona's internalized ogre self-loathing is sincere, but the premise is itself funny. It's like, what if the princess was cursed to turn into a horrible monster, and then she was rescued by a horrible monster, and they got horrible monster married? Like, womp womp. But yeah, the twist that it's sincere is a good way to put it. So I'd never read a story that was simultaneously this genre-aware and really weird with it. Like, all that stuff about, the butterfly. Okay, so there was a bit where you were watching the movie, and you're like, I'm sorry, Ireland exists in this world? And I was like, so do tacos. So, a lot's going on here. And, bottle caps.
And French as a language, and Latin as a language, and all of these songs from, when Bugs Bunny does it, it's fine, because that's the entire purpose of his character, and the world revolves around what is funniest for Bugs Bunny to be able to do. But when we have this otherwise very, like, ethereal and, like, melancholy, somber, like, oh, you're the last unicorn, look at Phil Collins and the saxophone back there. And then we cut to this dumbass butterfly spouting bullshit about, yes, unicornus, unicorn from French, and the world that is established seems to break immediately. And I understand it's like, oh, we're playing with the genre a little bit here, but I feel like what strikes me is that the story on paper is not terribly complicated. There are a couple twists in there. The king is the guy who they need to go to for help, but also he is evil. Okay, cool. That's neat. But
going to him for help is a strong way to describe what they're doing with King Haggard, but
information.
Yeah.
The story is simple. And the way they play with the tone maybe this is much more heavily pronounced in the movie than it is in the book of the butterfly. But it feels like it is breaking itself right at the outset, and then everything else, to me, felt like it was playing catch-up to establish a tone. And it's kind of like, oh, look at this goofy idiot who thinks he can play Robin Hood. And Smendrick, like, conjures up, oh, look at this procession of
summoned Robin Hood,
and guys like, oh,
yeah.
So I'm not trying to be the bad guy here.
No, of course
but
not.
I can see, like, the appeal of being able to play something very genre-savvy and very sincere. But I only got a couple moments of true sincerity, like when Molly is like, where were you?
Yep.
You didn't come for me. I was waiting for you. Like, that's like, oh, this is the one good scene in this movie. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And if the book is like that, I get it. But the movie was not like that, except for right there.
What I think is we're running into is that there's a feeling in the book, and it is a lot of that feeling, because what Molly is saying to the unicorn in that moment is, the story was supposed to go this way, and because it didn't, I assumed it would never happen for me. How dare you come to me now that I am not the kind of person this story happens to? That is an incredibly meta concept, and it's gut-wrenching. And we'll get more to Molly, she's important. But that is a feeling that permeates a lot of the book, but it is really hard to capture in a non-prose medium, because so much of it is just the texture of the story, and that's not something that cleanly translates to a visual medium. Like, the butterfly shows up at about that same point in the story. Like, we've been with the unicorn, and she's kind of trapped with indecision of like, oh, they said I'm the last, that doesn't make any sense, but I don't really want to leave and find out. And like, unicorns aren't good at making decisions, so she's just kind of like, well, no, I'm gonna do it before I change my mind. And she books it, and the first person she runs into is the butterfly, which just drops an absolute barrage of non-contemporary pop culture references. And the thing is, like, in the movie, this is just a thing that happens, and in the book, the unicorn is like, I'm not gonna get any sense out of this thing. You know, butterflies live such a short time, and they're kind of all fucked up in the head because their perception of time doesn't really work, because they live for such a short, because the unicorn is immortal. So from her perspective, anything that isn't immortal is already fucked from the outset, and something that lives like butterflies on the order of days or weeks is even more fucked. So this thing is just spouting phrases it's picked up from somewhere, you know, things it's heard on the wind, things that might not even be from this timeline, and she's like, great, whatever. And then it says unicorn, and she's like, oh, you do know me, you've got information in there. And like, it's a fun little challenge of like this ethereal, timeless being trying to get some sense out of this absolute nonsense machine. And you are kind of right that like the rest of the book is playing catch up, because this is about as ridiculous as the book gets, is dealing with the butterfly, and then everything after that's a little more solid. But anyway, it's interesting. It's one of the most unique parts of the book, and I think it's a real challenge to translate it into anything that isn't the book, and I don't really think the movie pulled it off so much. But I will say, as a point of comparison, I think that the only other book I've read that was comparable in terms of how sincere it is while simultaneously being trope aware is The Princess Bride.
Yeah, for sure.
The other side, that I actually think the Princess Bride movie is better at capturing that feeling than the book was, which goes a little bit too hard on the silly meta commentary and like the authorial footnotes where he's just dishing about his failing marriage, and I'm like, sir, any editor would have caught that. You've broken my immersion in this story. But yes, just a quick summary in case people who are watching this video have not watched or read the book. The story in brief, like you said, is very simple. The premise is something has happened to the unicorns. This unicorn hears from a couple hunters in her forest that there are no more unicorns in the world, and if there is a unicorn in this forest, it's probably the last. And she's like, that doesn't sound right. I can't be the only unicorn in the world. There's never been a world without unicorns in it. So she steels herself and she goes out on a journey to find out what happens to all the unicorns, and she gets helped along the way by an extremely inept magician and a genre-savvy ex-bandit. They learn that the Wicked King Haggard is in some way responsible for the disappearance of the unicorns using this, it's not really explained, some kind of nightmarish eldritch abomination that he commands called the Red Bull, which is far more eldritch in the book. It's like, it looked directly at it and it kind of seems like it fills the entire skybox. It's weird. You know, again, prose is very good at describing things that cannot be visualized. Making a visual story out of it is really fucking hard.
They really do Dark Beast Ganon, the Red Bull. It's like, oh, that's it? It's kind of embarrassing.
It sure is a big on-fire monster, very slow.
Yeah.
In a moment of critical confrontation, Schmendrick the Magician uses his magic, which he has no control over, to do something plot relevant, and what it does is it turns the unicorn into a human. The Red Bull is programmed to only hunt unicorns, so he gets all confused and leaves, and then the unicorn is very pissed at having been turned from an immortal, ethereal being to a lame human who only thinks it's beautiful. And now that she's become this beautiful princess lady, not immortal, becoming more human by the second, she finds herself ensnared by this fairy tale that's been forming around her, when previously in the story she's sort of been breaking various rules because they just don't apply to her because she's something else entirely. But now she's subject to the whims of the story she's in, and now she has to find out what happened to the unicorns before she loses herself entirely to the story that's forming around her of this princess and this love story with this prince.
Yeah, the genre is changing out from underneath her, which is very interesting and does not come across in the film at all.
Yeah, so there's a very important dichotomy in the structure of the book, and the first half of it is the rules everyone knows. These are the narrative rules that people understand govern their reality like we understand the laws of physics, and that's that fairy tale tropes and classical folklore are just the way the world works. Abandoned children that are miraculously kept alive by wild animals are, that's Romulus and Remus right there. They are 100% important. It's generally good policy to adopt them, but if you don't, that's okay. You just become part of the space of things that make their lives extremely complicated and difficult forever, which is also just, comes with the hero bag. Beautiful princesses and heroic princes fall in love with each other and live happily ever after, but first they have to get through the tribulations. If a lady is in distress, a hero will turn up to help her, which usually involves killing something. It's also the primary method that you court ladies. Wicked kings exist. Heroes will eventually turn up to make them stop. Magic as a thing is mostly illusion, but it usually has to anchor itself to something real to make that real thing seem like it follows the illusion. Whereas real magic, which is what Schmendrick does and can barely control, is something extremely different with a mind of its own, and very few people can actually perceive the real world around them. They are caught up in illusions. Most people can't see the unicorn as a unicorn. That's something like that. And there are also rules about unicorns that are generally understood, but we are aware from minute one that they aren't true, which is an interesting note. The general story is like, oh, a young virgin woman with a golden bridle has to sing sweetly and this will lure the unicorns out of hiding. And we actually see this happen, and a unicorn doesn't show up, and then as soon as they leave, the unicorn walks out of the woods next to them with the rest of the crew, and they're like, why didn't you go to that lady? And the unicorn's like, probably would have scared the shit out of her if I did, Unicorns are more scary to princesses than dragons are because they make a promise to unicorns that they don't make promises to dragons, and anyway, she wasn't expecting me to show up and she would have freaked out, so it wouldn't have been fun. And it's just very funny that this would work if the unicorn wasn't an absolute diva and not interested.
Yeah.
And I have some quotes from the book about the way that the rules work and just the way that the characters see the rules. Again, the thing with Schmandrick and Captain Cully, he has a good grounding in Anglo-Saxon folklore. He knows the type that Captain Cully is, and he's correct. When they hear about, the baby being kept alive by the stray cats, and Molly's like, of course you adopted him, because that's how it works. And the guy's like, I tried to get the baby killed because that baby was going to be a problem later. He even says, I might have chanced the child, but they made it so obvious, so mythological. Was I supposed to just raise this kid knowing he was going to destroy our town later? And then later, when Molly's furious about this, Schmendrick is like, well, think about it this way. If they hadn't abandoned the baby, he couldn't have grown up to be a hero. Haven't you ever been in a fairy tale before? A hero has to be in trouble from the moment of his birth, or he's not a real hero. And he even says, it's a great relief to find out about Prince Lear. I've been waiting for this tale to turn up a leading man. And it's just, that in microcosm is the entire book. Schmendrick is I'm not the main character. And it's so fucking nice to finally figure out who he is, because now I see where the story's gonna go. This is just the underpinning. This is the substrate of the story, that there are rules of reality, and they are, from our perspective, fairy tale tropes. And the characters who live in them know what they are and how they work. And they just kind of deal with them. And you get characters like Molly, who's fundamentally decent, but also still anchored to the tropes. It's an abandoned child. Of course you raised him. You were the stern but fair blacksmith father. It's no, I tried to kill the baby. Oh, what? okay. Schmendrick's like, no, don't worry. This is actually still following the rules. But then on the flip side, there's this other thing happening in the book, and that is the things that are real. And the thing is, this book uses the word real in a really weird way. And this is the first part. When I first read the book, that was the part that I snagged on, because I was like, it means something. It's doing something with this, because they're using the word so carefully. And it's never strictly defined, you don't get a dictionary definition of it, but it is a distinction that the characters who sort of know what's up are innately and intimately aware of. So the story explicitly says that some things that are real are unicorns, dragons, harpies, and other immortal figures of legend and myth, in explicit contrast with the mortal protagonists who are not, in this definition, real. Schmendrick's magic is real, but the illusions of the antagonist Mami Fortuna are not real. And in fact, she gets in a lot of trouble for having captured a harpy, which is a real thing. It's too real for her magic to contain. And that's like the only time where I think the movie sort of taps into this dichotomy, which is otherwise laced through the book, is like, Mami Fortuna's magic is illusion, but she captured a real harpy. And the unicorn is like, oh, so she's basically already dead then? And it's like, yeah, we know. Like, she can't keep that harpy in the cage, but she's too proud of the fact that she pulled it off to let her go. And that means as soon as the harpy breaks out, and that's going to happen soon, she's just dead. She's already dead, and they all know it. But she's like, if the harpy kills me, that also proves that I really managed to piss her off. Like, the fact that Mami Fortuna's magic isn't real, and that she herself isn't really like a quote-unquote real witch, is this sort of underlying tragedy of her character in the book that, again, doesn't really get focused on the movie, but that's okay. At a later point in the movie, again, when Schmendrick is captured by the Robin Hood LARPers, he uses his magic to, it kind of just does what it wants, and what it does is it summons a vision of Robin Hood and his merry men. And in the movie, they just kind of look like sort of sparkly versions of regular people, but in the book, they're explicitly described as like giants, like titans among men, and it really highlights that they are these legendary, literally larger than life figures, and it makes the characters that are seeing this feel even smaller and more inadequate in comparison. But they're also taken in, they clearly tell it's an illusion, but the people who are seeing this happen are so desperately in love with the image of being cool badasses like Robin Hood that they all charge off into the forest after them, and it's this really profoundly tragic thing that's going on. Captain Cully and co. are actually really heartbreaking in the book. The only character in the book who is described as real, who is a human, is the primary antagonist, King Haggard, and that's an interesting little note.
Yeah. It does get a sense of like the forces of nature in the fairy tales are the things that are real, although it doesn't really fit because the protagonist should be that, but they're also kind of like Schmendrick and Molly and even kind of Prince Lear, like these weird like scraps of characters that are not any of the heroic archetypes you would expect to find, whether that's a noble one true king, or even your destitute daughter-in-laws of the wicked stepmother character. They aren't those kinds of like natural forces that will and always exist in fairy tales in the way of a character like Haggard is more of that. Again, I don't know if that's really it, but it's a shape of a thought that's forming in my mind.
No, that's definitely some of it. I would say the only point there that's a little bit weird is that Prince Lear is very much a heroic archetype, but he becomes that way after he meets the Lady Amalthea, and she's so unattainable and mysterious, and he's like, well, I know how to court ladies. You go out and you do great deeds and you kill stuff. And like, there's even a part in the book where he's like lamenting to Molly, like, man, nothing I do impresses her. I've killed 5 dragons. I've been fighting black knights at the crossroads for weeks. I've broken so many curses. And Molly's like, well, maybe Lady Amalthea can't be wooed that way. And he's like, is there another way to impress a girl? It's very funny.
I mean, there's a kind of a version of that in the movie, although I guess it is kind of a sense of like he does undergo a character transformation that turns him into the kind of one true king archetype, whereas before he's not quite as embarrassing as Schmendrick, who just simply cannot do anything right with his magic except like vaguely point and hope.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's something. I don't have a grasp on it, though. We'll see what we find as we go.
We will, yeah. But Schmendrick is also an interesting case because, again, in the book, there's more going on with him. And it's a note that I guess they just didn't put in the movie because it was going to be complicated. But Schmendrick says a few times in the book that he's older than he looks. And what this means is that he was apprenticed to a great legendary wizard, Nikos, who, for his legendary act, once saved a unicorn from a hunter by turning the unicorn into a human man. Could never figure out how to turn it back. The unicorn grew old, got married no kids, but died of old age. And when the unicorn hears that, she's like, damn, that's fucked up. I sure hope nobody does that to me. Wink. The thing is, Nikos was like, Schmendrick, you are absolutely hopeless at magic. You cannot do a single goddamn thing right. But I can tell you've got some kind of potential. The problem is you will for sure die of old age before you ever figure out what it is. So I'm gonna give you a curse. I'm gonna make you immortal until you get your magic under control. You'll have all the time in the world to figure your shit out, and once you get your magic under control, the immortality spell will break. So just casually throughout the book, Schmendrick is like, if I can figure out how to help this unicorn, that'll for sure make me a real wizard and break this immortality curse on me so I can actually live a real life and also be a great wizard. 50-50. Both of those things are important. Yeah. So part of what he's struggling with is the fact that his magic is real, but he doesn't know how to get a handle on it. And he keeps trying to control it and it doesn't work, and he keeps trying to make it do what he wants and it doesn't work, and it only works when he says, let the magic do what it wants. And by the end of the book, it works. Like, not only does he figure out how to use magic, he figures out how to use magic smoothly and effortlessly, like it's an extension of his body. It just becomes a part of him because he stopped trying to control it and fight it. It's just an extension of who he is. And it's very interesting because none of that shit made it into the movie.
The barest hint.
Yeah.
But that's it.
Because when he first meets the unicorn, he's like, hey, just so you know, I'm also real. There's something going on with me that's also real, but I wish I was cooler, but I'm sadly not. And this slide is just a bunch of quotes that specifically use reality. These are the things where I was like, what does it mean? It clearly means something. The thing I mentioned about like the Robin Hood folks are very, very sad and depressing in a very real way. A lot of that comes through in the character of Molly Grew, who's initially introduced as one of them, because they're very much like a Timu Robin Hood gang, and she's kind of like, we have Maid Marian at home, and she knows this and she hates it. And when Schmendrick summons the illusion of Robin Hood, she, who's been very sensible this whole time and very much like, Cully, this wizard is a trickster and a thief, and you should just kill him now and not fall for it, she also sees Robin Hood and goes charging off into the wood. And Cully is the one who's like, no, guys, no, Robin Hood's fake. We're real. We're the reality. She turns back to him and says, no, there's no such person as you or me or any of us. Robin and Marian are real, and we are the legend. And I'm still not hundo P on what she means by that, but I do think that there's something there about like the story is immortal and that makes it real, because it does kind of seem like the reality of something is linked with its immortality. Immortals like the unicorn and the harpy and powerful forces like Schmendrick's magic and the Red Bull, those are real in a way that the storybook world around them aren't. So the humans mostly live in this storybook world, and it follows tropes and patterns. They have free will, but stories kind of have a tendency to happen around them no matter what. And the specific point where the dichotomy between the reality and the storybook world becomes very visible is when the unicorn is transformed using real magic into Lady Amalthea, because we've seen the unicorn be affected by illusions before. When Mami Fortuna briefly has her captured, she puts an illusion of a horn on her, because anyone who looks at the unicorn will basically see her as a horse. So in order to make her look like a unicorn, Mami Fortuna has to put an illusory horn on her head.
Second horn.
Yeah. And Schmendrick is the only one who can see that she's a unicorn, although Mami Fortuna can tell what she is, but she knows that nobody else will be able to see it. So we've seen her affected by illusions before, and that doesn't bother her. But when she's transformed into Lady Amalthea, that's real, because otherwise it wouldn't have been able to fool the Red Bull. So she's actually become a human with all that entails, and she's absolutely horrified by it, and she can feel this fictional character of the Lady Amalthea beginning to like grow and eclipse the part of her that is this real unicorn. And that is a very interesting kind of cosmic horror story to be having in a world that is aware that it's a fiction. On that note, the antagonist of the story, King Haggard, is very interesting because he also, like we said, he's described at one point as very real. And the role he has in the story is very stock and storybook. He's a wicked king. He's caused all the problems. He lives in a cursed castle. He refused to pay the witch, and she put a curse on it, and he was like, hell yeah, that makes my castle way cooler. But his actual motivation does make it pretty cleanly into the movie, and he's performed by Christopher Lee, so like obviously he fucking slaps. Yeah. He's great. King Haggard's thing is that he has depression. He finds the world boring, tedious, exhausting. He finds no joy worth the effort of finding it. Everything around him is tropes and illusion. Like, he's genre savvy to the point of being like, ugh, cliche, seen it, next, derivative.
That's why he yeets the old magician out of his court, because like, Schmendrick is terrible. That'll be more interesting.
Yeah, well, he's truly like, I've tried having the best wizard, and it hasn't made me happy, so maybe having a really shit wizard, just an absolute dog shit wizard who's bad at his job will make me happy.
Never seen a worse clown than Pagliacci. Gas loser clown.
But Doctor, I know who you are. The only thing he's ever seen scene that made him feel something is when he saw unicorns. When he was a young man out in the wild, he saw a couple of unicorns and he was like, whoa, that's awesome. I must have them. So in order to like capture them so he can look at them whenever he wants, he has the Red Bull capture them all and drive them into the sea beyond his castle so he can just look out at the sea and see that the unicorns are being like held there in some way. Because like the power of the Red Bull is a little bit mythical and vague. It's essentially, it terrifies things. The unicorns are driven before it, and he kind of keeps them cowed. And it's like they're within like a step of the shore, but if they get ashore, the Red Bull will come after them. So they stay in the water even though they're close to land. The other thing is that the weird like perception filter over the unicorns is affecting also the unicorns in the ocean. None of the characters can see the unicorns that have been trapped in the ocean, not even the unicorn after she's become the Lady Amalthea.
Yeah.
Although she does keep looking at the sea. There's something about it that's drawing her eye, but she can't see them. Only Haggard can see them at this point.
It's wild that Haggard goes to all this effort to create this vision of the unicorns in the water off his castle. My brain provided me with the joke line, rich people will do anything but pay an artist.
Yeah, or go to therapy, Jesus. But yeah, it really kind of feels like Haggard is like genre savvy and has been around too long, and he knows that his world is just, it's fleeting, repetitive tropes. So the only things that he loves are these like sparks of reality that make him feel something, and he of course cages them so he can never lose them, although in doing so he strips real magic out of the world. And there's a few points in the story where it's like the fact that there are no more unicorns in the world is something's wrong. There's something broken about reality now that it doesn't have this source of beauty and magic in it, and it's probably contributing to the passive enshitting of everything. And the fact that people can look at a unicorn and not recognize it anymore is a sign that things have gone so wrong, and they can't even tell because of the unicorn perception filter. Most people just assume that unicorns are mythical and not real, and Haggard knows, but he's just got all the unicorns to himself, although it's clearly not giving him the same like spark that it did the first time. But you know, it's all he's got. Again, depression.
Yeah.
But Haggard is one of a very small number of people in the book who are just capable of perceiving the world as it really is, including real creatures like the unicorn. And there's a bit which does make it into the movie, actually very cleanly. I think because of Christopher Lee. When he was cast as Haggard, this is a story I've heard, is that he came with his own copy of the book and had highlighted parts that they were not allowed to cut. So a lot of Haggard's lines have just made it verbatim in.
Which is crazy considering that the author of the book also wrote the screenplay or co-authored it. So Christopher Lee is like, I'm not going to let you fuck this up.
I'm here to play King Haggard and I'm going to do it fucking right. It's like Ariana Grande being like, I don't want to play Glinda as Ariana. I want to play Glinda. Don't you dare Ariana her. But yeah, so as Lady Amalthea, because like Lady Amalthea of course shows up and it's the sketchiest thing. Haggard is like looking at them. It's like, okay, that man is playing the fool. That woman, she's got a face like mine, which makes her dangerous. That other third person with them, who the fuck is that? And Prince Lear is like, wow, that's a beautiful woman, the most beautiful I've ever seen. And Haggard is like, is it? I don't think that's entirely what's going on there. You better keep an eye on that one. It's dangerous. So like he can immediately tell like Lady Amalthea is for sure not just some normal princess in distress or whatever, but he won't let on what's going on until at one point he has a conversation with her when they're sort of on the top of the tower, and he's basically just telling her everything, but she has at this point lost so much of who she was that she cannot understand what he's saying, because he's going off. He's like, I knew as soon as you showed up, I knew what you were. I don't know what game you're playing, pretending to be this thing, but like I know you're here for the others. Look, you can see them coming in the water, you can see them in the waves. And she's like, my lord, I don't understand. I see nothing at all in the water, because she's become so much this ordinary human that she can not even perceive the unicorns in the water. She can barely remember why she's there, because the story that's wrapped itself around her is about her and Prince Lear and this love story they're playing out together. And Haggard is like giving his full third act breakdown, like, of course I knew you were here to destroy everything I've built, you know, like she truly does not understand what the fuck he's talking about at this point. And it actually freaks him out, because he when he first meets her, he looks into her eyes and he sees reflected in them the grove, the forest that she calls home. Like it never quite leaves her. It's just like, why can I see baby animals and trees in your eyes instead of me?
Yeah, he says, why can't I see myself? Yeah.
But then when he's having this argument, when he's yelling at her on the top of this tower, he looks in her eyes and he sees himself reflected, and he's like, why can I see myself in your eyes? Why can't I see that forest anymore? And she's like, I don't understand what you're talking about. And it really does seem to freak him out that like, of course, he saw the immortal beauty of the unicorns. He trapped them in an immortal prison so he can always look at them. And now the last unicorn has come to him, but she's become something mortal and fading, and the beauty within her that he recognized is going away right before his eyes. And it really does seem to distress him quite a lot, which makes sense because his characterization is like everything in the world is boring and tropey, and she's literally turning from this immortal, ethereal incarnation of beauty itself to an ordinary princess playing out an ordinary love story with his own boring adoptive son. So he's very interesting. He's going on some very interesting stuff. Haggard deserves the real seal of approval because some shit's going on with him.
I'm surprised he doesn't react like, oh, this is new, this is interesting. I think he's too concerned with like the loss of the beauty of a unicorn from the world.
Yeah.
One fewer to put into his little snow globe.
Yeah.
Off the coast. But I am surprised he didn't have more of a, oh, you're fascinating kind of reaction rather than just kind of abject tragedy. I mean, I on the surface of it, of course, I get it.
Yeah.
But it seems like the reading that we're developing here, which I do think is true, I would have expected him to act a little differently, I guess.
I think there's maybe a couple reasons why he doesn't react like, oh, interesting, a unicorn has become a mortal human, is that one, he's so sick of mortal humans at this point, where it's like, oh, a unicorn has become something gross and boring. And the other thing is, this is not the first time in history a unicorn has been turned into a human. Schmendrick's mentor, Nikos, famously did it. So it's not even the first time this has happened in history. Haggard's like, great, I know that story. The unicorn stopped being a cool unicorn and then just got old and died. That's boring. It's boring me. Derivative.
Yeah. I guess, and even if you hadn't seen it, having heard about it would be enough. You're right.
Exactly.
I forgot about first human unicorn.
Yeah, false advertising. She's not the last unicorn, and she's not even the first unicorn to become a human. Like, truly, Haggard is just having a very bad week. There is, as a foil to Haggard, one other character in the book who kind of sees the world the same way that he does, and that's Molly Grew. Like, he even recognizes this, because like I said, when he first sees our trio of protagonists coming up the front steps, he's like, that woman looks like she sees the world the same way I do, which makes her extremely dangerous. It's like, yeah, real recognizes real, quite literally. But the thing with Molly is that where Haggard is, of course, he's a wicked king. His life is miserable, but a lot of it is like, he's got all this power and he just kind of uses it to like pinch pennies and not pay witches that he hires to build his evil cursed castle and shit like that. Like, his hell is kind of entirely of his own creation because therapy doesn't exist in this world. Molly is very much kind of the chew toy of reality, and she's genre savvy enough to know that she is not the kind of person who gets to be important or have a happy ending. And in some very sad, real ways, she's nearly 40. She's a plain-looking brunette. She has no notable skills. She even mentions in the book, like, there's a few points where you can really see the emotional damage this has done. When Cully is trying to impress Schmendrick with his fake tales of fake Robin Hood stories, and his other, like, merry men are kind of like, well, Cully, whenever we show up at those archery tournaments in disguise, like, we don't really win, although, sometimes they do compliment us on our disguises. And she's like, yeah, there was that one year with the tapestry competition. I did like a knight fighting a dragon. Everyone was doing knights that year. I got 5th place. And then she like scrubs away tears and like, it's like, whoa, okay. The fact that these guys are just normal people trying to fill the shoes of an extraordinary story they can't live up to. And it's hurting them all so much, but especially Molly, because she doesn't really tell her story, but she mentions a couple times in the book, like, oh, when I was like 17 and I ran off with a sweet young man who would, wooed me with poetry, and then we spent the next 20 years living in the woods, not really doing anything interesting or important. Like, she had a time in her life where she could have been the heroine of a story, but no story came to get her. Yeah. So she just ended up living with these fucking sad, like, cosplayers in the woods. And she's aware enough of her place in the world to know that she's outlived the part where she gets to be important.
It's an interesting reversal where you have Lady Amalthea taking too much form, and the story swiftly fills the void to meet her and be like, you're this now. Whereas Molly's like, could have fucking happened to me at any point. any loose narrative that wants to roll onto Molly Grew's house in the woods? No. Cool. I do find her to, like, as I was watching it, I'm like, oh, this is the best scene. Like, this is the one scene that I feel like is actually doing what maybe the book was intending to do, or at least it's the one scene that's landing for me watching it.
Yeah.
I feel like she is, maybe this is cruel, the one interesting character to me.
I think that's
in
fair.
This book, because I feel like she actually has internality in a way that none of these other chuckle fucks really do. Like, I like King Haggard conceptually. He's a good antagonist, but he is the problem that he is experiencing in his life is also the problem that I was having watching him, of that he is exactly what he is on the tin.
Yep.
He is bored. That leads him to do good villainous things in the story and move the plot, but there's not a lot really going on beyond man drove all the unicorns into the sea and he's still sad about it.
Yeah.
I find Schmendrick to be catastrophically embarrassing of a character. I cannot root for him at all.
Schmendrick is, he's simultaneously kind of more annoying in the book, but in a more interesting way. Like, he's got the nuances of, like, immortal and doesn't like it. You know, he's kind of an interesting foil to the unicorn, because the unicorn is like, I'm immortal and that slaps. And he's like, well, I'm immortal and it sucks and I want it to stop. You know, it's two different perspectives on the same thing. And he's kind of this, like, interestingly more manipulative figure in the book sometimes. Like, when he's like, the story's happening the way it's going to happen, he also sometimes nudges it so that it plays out the way it should. And there's even a part where Molly, like, accuses him of, like, the only thing you care about is getting your magic. This makes it into the movie very slightly, but it's stripped of enough lines and context it doesn't hit the same. Because in the book, she's like, you don't care about whatever love story's playing out here. You don't want to let them be happy. You just care about turning her back to a unicorn so you can become a real wizard and, you know, your magic will be under your control. You can be immortal again. And he's like, I really wish that was the only thing I cared about. My life would be so fucking easy if all I cared about was my own magic, but unfortunately I do care about shit, which is good. That's more nuance than he really gets in the movie.
No,
even though he says that line, he says that line and it just doesn't hit right because it doesn't follow up. And, like, there's this other thing with specifically the dynamic between the unicorn and Molly. They share this, like, odd, unspoken, timeless bond, and we really only see it from the outside, from Schmendrick's perspective, and he's mostly just kind of seething with envy about it, because, like, the thing that happens with Molly is, like, after she's like locked into this very sad life as Timu made Marion, the unicorn appears, and she has, again, the best scene in the movie where she just absolutely shatters. In fact, the movie actually has one part of the line that isn't in the book and makes it better, which is when she says, "Where were you when I was new?" That line's not in the book, but it's really fucking good because it just boils down the entire thing. Like, where were you when I was fresh out the box, woman? Like, when I was supposed to have a unicorn come for me. How can you come to me now when I'm not a beautiful young woman? I'm not a virgin anymore. You know, why is this when this is happening, when I'm not fit to play the part? The unicorn as a character comes across as this very sort of alien presence and frequently rather dismissive of human concerns. But with Molly, she almost seems apologetic. Like, we're seeing this from Schmendrick's POV, and Schmendrick is waiting for the unicorn to be like, huh, whatever, but instead she just says, I'm here now, and Molly's like, it's okay, I forgive you, and Schmendrick is like, unicorns are to be forgiven? What the fuck? How dare you? And, like, he's explaining all these things about, like, oh, unicorns, you know, you don't get to forgive unicorns, you don't get to come with us, and Molly just says, you clearly don't know very much about unicorns, and then she's just in. She and the unicorn have this, like, they're vibing, and Schmendrick is like, this isn't fair. I don't understand what's happening, and it isn't fair. And, like, there's a little note, which, again, didn't make it into the movie, but, like, nobody touches the unicorn for the entire book except Molly. Molly gets to, like, you know, nuzzle her and like, wipe her tears on her mane, and Schmendrick, who spent the entire book very purposefully not touching the unicorn, is like, that's unfair, man. It's important because there's a point at the end of the book where, like, Lady Amalthea reaches out a hand to Lear, but he doesn't see her do it and doesn't take her hand, and Schmendrick, who's observing this, is like, damn, she would have given him something really important and he would have never understood the significance of it if she had let him touch her. And there's an early part when Mommy Fortuna is trying to capture her for her evil carnival, and they're like, well, can we just pick her up and move her? And they're like, no, if you touch her, she will awaken from any spell, so we're just gonna disassemble this entire cage and build it around her, and when she wakes up, we'll do something else. The fact that touching the unicorn is not allowed is so important in the book. Everyone knows it, and only Molly gets to do it, and she and the unicorn are both cool with it, and Schmendrick is kind of seething all book because he's like, there's something there's something profound that I can't have, and I can't understand it, and I don't know what to do about it.
Yeah, so that is fascinating, and it's what I wanted from the rest of the movie and did not get almost at all. No, this scene is sort of, it's the point where you can see the book and the movie come into sync with one another, and you're like, yes, this scene is great in both of these things. Because when Molly sees this beautiful reality of the unicorn, who in its own way, like, has this sort of odd transcendent narrative love for her of just like, yes, unicorns and women have this special bond of some way, and all that other stuff,
oh, they need to be young, they need to be beautiful, they need to be pure. That's all apparently fake bullshit, and the unicorn doesn't care about it. But the unicorn likes Molly, and Molly likes the unicorn, and they just get to vibe. And in this process, Molly is sort of transformed because she gets to shed all of this like narrative self-loathing that's been piled on her over these years of like, you are an irrelevant background character, not fit to scrub the laundry of the beautiful maidens that unicorns actually go to. And now it's like, just kidding, here's a unicorn and she likes you. Or at least she tolerates your presence. You know, unicorns don't really feel that kind of thing. But yeah, the way I put it on the slide, the unicorn's gentle indifference allows Molly to free herself from these fake trappings of reality. And this is part of why I think Molly is such an interesting foil for Haggard, because they both have this transcendent, transformative experience seeing a unicorn for the first time. But Molly is just like content to be in the unicorn's presence, and the unicorn is content to let her follow them on their journey. Whereas Haggard is like, this made me feel something. I must have all of it forever and none for anyone else.
Yeah.
All the characters sort of interact with one another in a weird thematic way, but Molly is probably the most interesting lens through which to view the story. There is another mirror for King Haggard's perspective on the world, because of course Haggard is unable to find any value in the fleeting temporary trappings of the world around him, which is why he seeks out and imprisons the unicorns for their immortal beauty that makes him feel things. And the other character who is this dismissive and like, you know, scornful of anything that is mortal and fleeting is the unicorn. It is one of her many traits that make her kind of intentionally unlikable in a very interesting way. When as homework I assigned you Dom's Lost in Adaptation video, that was the thing that I thought was interesting that he zeroed in on, is like, yeah, I don't like the unicorn as a person, but I think I'm not supposed to. Like,
yeah.
she's kind of an egotistical dickhead who doesn't really care about anybody, but like that is sort of how she's built, so like...
You made me a normie!
Yeah.
How could you do this to me?
Every time this kind of thing comes up, you know, mortality is brought up, or like anything cool about humans, or, you know, flowers or other things that fade away. The unicorn's like, sounds lame and bad and sad, actually. Not as cool as me, who will be the exact same kind of cool and pretty forever. She's even explicitly like, it would be better to simply get murdered by the Red Bull than it would be to get turned into something that is not me. It's an interesting existential crisis for her to have. You know, if you are this immortal, unchanging, well, mostly unchanging, like, beautiful being. It's literally the first line in the book, so I'm just gonna read it.
Wow.
The unicorn lived in a lilac wood, and she lived all alone. She was very old, though she did not know it, and she was no longer the careless color of sea foam, but rather the color of snow falling on a moonlit night. But her eyes were still clear and unwearied, and she still moved like a shadow on the sea. So, like, that's where we're starting from, is like, if unicorns do change, it is that they change from, like, off-white to bluish off-white. And if they age, they don't notice, and nothing has actually happened. She could be here for another several thousand years, and nothing will change. So as soon as she becomes something with a lifespan numbered in decades, oh, baby, she's not having a good time with it. She's the exact same kind of miserable as Haggard is, but she's coming at it from the other side, where she knows what it's like to be something true and beautiful and eternal, and she hates that it's been taken away from her.
Just imagining, like, the internal monologue of the unicorn as Amalthea, like, Schmendrick, you idiot, it's drip or drown out here, you can't do this to me.
She's even meaner about it. It's interesting, because she's like, I wish you had, instead of turning me into a princess or a woman, you turned me into, like, a rhinoceros, because a rhinoceros is ugly as shit, but a rhinoceros doesn't think it's beautiful. It's more horrifying to be something that thinks it's beautiful and is wrong than it is to be something actually ugly. In the same way that she's like, it would be better to be dead than be turned into something that will die. It's very interesting. I describe this later. It's borderline xenofiction. Like, the fact that her perspective on the world is so inhuman it's a very solid bit of writing, and it's very consistent. And frankly, a lot of that does make it into the movie. It's just a lot of the framework around it for contrast kind of doesn't.
The interesting thing about it is that we suddenly get a lot of, like, voice and dialogue for a character that up until this point has had, you know, some, but generally very little. And suddenly, as a human woman, the unicorn's like, now wait a goddamn minute. Whereas before, we get this sense from looking at the unicorn, but there's none of the prose there, so it's really just like, okay, it's kind of walking ethereally.
Yeah.
That doesn't give me much to work with, and that moment is hard in animation or in any, you know, visual medium, because you have the first moment where the unicorn really gets to, like, verbalize much of anything, and it also is the unicorn at its most unlikable, which is a fierce little contrast to try to wrangle as a writer and then as an audience member.
Yeah, I do
Reasons I struggled.
Yeah, I do think that one of the benefits of reading it as a book is that you get a lot more, like, you're following the unicorn more closely. You're not exactly in her head for a lot of it, but it's sort of like very very close in third person omniscient, where you sort of like, you know what's up with the unicorn, you know why she's feeling what she's feeling, you're told what she's noticing in a given situation. There's not exactly internality for her, but you start pretty close behind her, and it's not until the other characters start showing up that you get other POVs, which of course makes sense. But of course in a visual medium, everything in the frame is kind of being given roughly equal credence. So like we're following the unicorn around, and she talks to herself some in the woods and some in the road. Also, in the movie, Amalthea talks too much. She's very quiet in the book. After a certain turning point in the story, she never says another line of dialogue in the entire book. There's a lot left in the book at that point. It's just she can get across so much from just being observed from the outside, but it's harder to communicate that in a visual medium, ironically. But yes, so of course this does kind of center in on the question, what does this book mean when it says something is real? And we kind of have to go with how the unicorn means it. And the way she describes it is that like reality seems to be something that narratively permanent things get. So she's real, and the harpy is real, and dragons as a concept are real. But anything that can age or decay isn't real. It's something sort of transient. Like stories like Robin Hood apparently are real in some way, but that might just be because a story can be kind of told the same way over and over again, so it's a form of immortality. And it's only the living humans in this world that are being shaped by the stories that somehow don't count as real, even if the stories that are shaping them around are real in some way. I don't think that it would be possible to get like a strict mathematical definition of what they mean by reality, but I cannot help myself. That is always how I try to figure out what these things mean. Yeah. But it is interesting that Haggard seems to see the world the same way. Anything that isn't quote unquote real is boring and transient, and he's seen it before, and it can change and deteriorate or end, and that means it's not interesting. Only things that last forever are of interest to him or the unicorn. And even then, like, death isn't the problem. Like, the unicorn knows she can be killed, and she's not afraid of that happening, but she is afraid of becoming something else before she dies. And the idea that nothing that changes or is transient can be real or meaningful is something that's very baked into the unicorn's worldview, but it's something she gets called out on by Molly Grew, who in basically all other regards is very, like, admiring of the unicorn. This actually happens after that thing I mentioned where that princess does the whole, like, the spiel, the golden bridle, the song, and the unicorn doesn't show up, and she's like, whatever, and she leaves. And then the unicorn and co walk out of the woods, and Molly's like, why didn't you go to that princess? And the unicorn's like, I don't have time for that shit right now. I'm on a quest. I'm on a mission. But Molly says it's not the unicorn that has the time, it's those princesses. And of course, Molly is, like, from her perspective, 2 decades over the hill, past the point where she would get to be an important character in her own story. So she sees the unicorn being so dismissive of these mortal things because she's in a rush, and she's like, I wish you could be a princess for a little while, or a flower, or a duck, something that can't wait. Something that would teach the unicorn the urgency that everything in the world feels, that she, she's not obliged to help or whatever, but like the fact that the unicorn doesn't recognize what her presence can mean to these people. This is clearly something the unicorn struggles with, because of course, when Molly sees her for the first time and it goes through all 5 stages of grief and then is like, okay, I'm normal again, I'm now joining your quest. The unicorn isn't dismissive of this at any point. She clearly recognizes the impact she's having on it. The fact that people find unicorns ethereally, transcendently beautiful is a thing the unicorn knows about herself and likes, but seeing what that can mean to someone like Molly clearly does kind of shake her, but not enough for her to realize and recognize, like, oh, it might actually be meaningful and life-changing for someone to just catch a glimpse of me. Maybe I should consider that when I make my decisions on who gets to see me. And Molly's like, it would be nice if you were aware of the effect you had on people like that, so you could choose to be kind sometimes.
Yeah.
And of course, then they both get their wish, although when Schmendrick does turn her into the Lady Amalthea, Molly's the first person who yells at him about it. She's like,
yeah, what did you do?
Yeah, she'll go mad. You've trapped her in a human body, and she fucking hates it in there.
You idiot, you gave it anxiety.
You fucked up a perfectly good unicorn is what you've done. And yeah, so when the unicorn becomes the Lady Amalthea, she immediately starts running out of time. And it's not death by old age that threatens her on the timescale of the story. She's not going to be in the story for that long. It is the fact that mortals are changing all the time, and real things change almost never. So if she waits too long, she's going to become something else. But the problem is, Lady Amalthea is still on a very real level the unicorn, and the unicorn is canonically very bad at making choices, and also terrified of the Red Bull. So like, she's living in the castle with the Red Bull living under it, and the unicorns are somewhere nearby, but she doesn't know where they are, and like months go by, at least in the book, where she's just kind of like trying to like figure out what to do, trying to fight against the fact that she's becoming something else that is not interested in her quest. And so like the unicorn is still sort of paralyzed by the same fear of the Red Bull that made Schmendrick have to turn her into this in the first place, because otherwise she was just going to fully lose. But Lady Amalthea isn't terrified of the Red Bull. She's very blasé about, oh, it's just the bull making noises under the castle, whatever. But she's wrapped up in a story that the unicorn wasn't affected by, which is that she has a romance happening with Prince Lear, Haggard's son, the guy who was saved by the stray cats in the village, etc., etc., etc. So basically, she's kind of fucked, because it's like, okay, you need to move the story forward, but the unicorn can't because it's frozen with fear, and Lady Amalthea doesn't want to because she's doing a different story instead. And everyone else is like, well, what the fuck are we doing? How do we get out of this? Like, there's only two ways this can end, and the unicorn doesn't know how to end it, and Lady Amalthea wants a different ending, so how do we make this happen? And the love story between Amalthea and Lear is interestingly haunting, because we are mostly seeing it from like an outside perspective, like Molly is getting all the goss and learning what's going on. But of course, from the unicorn's perspective, becoming a human already sucks enough, and then becoming human enough to fall in love with some guy who's going to be dead in a few decades anyway, nightmare scenario. So the unicorn's not having a good time, but Lady Amalthea, this comes very naturally to her. And there's a few bits where Molly talks to the unicorn, because of course Lear is at his fucking wit's end. He's like, I killed a dragon for her, I brought her the head, and then she looked at it and she just had this expression, and it just made me feel like an absolute brute for bringing her a fucking dead thing, and now I feel like an asshole. And also, I mentioned that my horse got burned by the flames of the dragon, and she immediately went off to deal with the horse, and she touched it, and I could see she thought it was going to fix it, and then it didn't, and she had a breakdown and ran away. And Molly's like, oh man, that was a lot of things.
Lear's like, don't they know the dating pool sucks here? Can't a guy just like kill a dragon and give that as a gift? Like, come on.
Yeah.
I'm working here. I'm struggling.
I'm doing my fucking best, man. And it's interesting because, like, of course, Molly absolutely, like, loves the unicorn in a very profound way, but you know, she also really likes the Lady Amalthea. She basically takes very quickly to being her lady in waiting. And when Amalthea is like being cold to Lear, and of course having kind of a breakdown about the fact that she's not a unicorn and she can't heal with her horn anymore, which means the horse just died and she couldn't do anything, and she's very upset about that. She's like, you are being very mean to Lear, and the unicorn's like, I don't give a shit about that. I'm here on a mission, and the fact that I'm having distractive feelings about him is not good. It's kind of interesting. They're at a tipping point in the story. It could go one of two ways. Amalthea could pursue this love story with this handsome prince, or the unicorn could go and do the quest that she's here to do. But various things are conspiring to make that more difficult. And honestly, Molly and Schmendrick are kind of like, look, as long as she's happy, I don't really know if we have the right to make our decisions about what's going to happen. You know, I don't think we get to tell her how she should and shouldn't live her life. We've certainly never been able to do that before. But there is one character who they forgot to ask, and that's Prince Lear, because as soon as he learns anything about what's going on, basically they're like, okay, we've learned where the Red Bull is, we've learned where the unicorns maybe are and how to get there, so let's go and do it. But Amalthea is like, no, I don't want to do that. That's scary as shit. I just want to stay here with Lear and grow old and die together. And Molly's like, well, that makes me very sad, but I don't have the right to tell you no. And Schmendrick is like, yeah, I mean, whatever. Cool. I guess that's what we're doing now.
Guess we making circles now.
Yeah. I guess we making romances now. But Lear is a hero, and that comes with a certain set of skills. And I just have this quote, and some of this makes it into the movie, but in the context of the story of the book being so profoundly story fixated, it's more impactful in the book than it is in the movie.
What?
I know, it gets groundbreaking. But I mean, if you'll permit me, I can just read what this is.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. My lady, he said, I am a hero. It is a trade, no more. It has its own tricks and knacks and small arts. There are certain weak spots that all dragons have, and certain riddles that hooded strangers tend to set you. But the true secret of being a hero lies in knowing the order of things. The swineherd cannot already be wed to the princess when he embarks on his adventures, nor can the boy knock at the witch's door when she is away on vacation. The wicked uncle cannot be found out and foiled before he does something wicked. Things must happen when it is time for them to happen. Quests may not simply be abandoned, prophecies may not be left to rot like unpicked fruit. Unicorns may go unrescued for a long time, but not forever. The happy ending cannot come in the middle of the story. The Lady Amalthea did not answer him. Schmendrick asked, why not? Who says so? Heroes, Prince Lear replied sadly. And this is fun because it later leads into the bit where Molly is like, you, Schmendrick, you set this up. You reminded him that he was a hero, and that reminded him of his job so that he would destroy his own potential future happy romantic subplot. How dare you? And Schmendrick's like, I didn't know such thing. Shut up, he'll hear you. And it's very funny. But, like, the fact is, like, Molly and Schmendrick don't get the right to tell how the story goes, but Lear is the leading man. He does. Yeah. He does get to make that call. So when Amalthea is like, I want to live with you, he's like, well, That cannot be how things go. And he still tries to have it both ways. He's like, oh, that's okay. I love her regardless, you know, as you so eloquently put it. And Schmendrick is like, all right, well, isn't there someone you forgot to ask? From this point forward, this is the part where Amalthea stops speaking. She doesn't say a single word for the rest of the book after this, because I guess we doing rescuing the unicorns now. And the thing is, obviously, Lady Amalthea does not make it for much more of the book at this point, because, again, she's not real, and they're not doing the story where she would get to exist in. Mm-hmm. And pretty quickly, Schmendrick turns her back into the unicorn, in the process unleashing his magic in its true form and becoming a true wizard, etc., etc., etc. But the problem is, this kind of just reverts them back to their previous problem, which is the Red Bull terrifies her, and she can't fight back. Like, it just drives her towards the sea. It's a little confusing. We don't really get much internality on the unicorn, but it's pretty clear that, like, whatever eldritch nightmare the Red Bull is, a lot of what terrifies the unicorn about it is, like, it's completely incomprehensible. It doesn't play by the rules. She can't outrun it, which is, of course, the main way that the unicorn is supposed to, like, oh, you chase her, but she's faster than you. It's like, well, this thing's faster than her, so what do we do? And there's a note in the book, which is that the Red Bull seems to be blind, which part of what else upsets the unicorn is that it can't see how hot she is, so, like... Yeah. The Red Bull can't even admire how pretty she is when it tries to kill her. It's kind of rough, because now she's a unicorn again, and Lady Amalthea is out, and, like, the love story's off the table, and she's real again, but that doesn't solve the problem of what to do about the fact that the Red Bull is going to drive her into the sea with the rest of the unicorns, and they're like, okay, well, fucking do something, Schmendrick, Mr. Magical Wizard Man, who now has magic powers. What use is wizardry if it cannot save a unicorn? And then he looks Lear dead in the eyes and says, that's what heroes are for. And Lear's like, oh, okay, I see what we're doing here, and just absolutely yeets himself into the path of the Red Bull and gets his ass fully killed.
Dom described it in his video saying, like, yeah, he just kind of gets, like, knocked over and just kind of, like, crumples into a heap, no blood, no mess. Like, in the book, his face is caved in.
It's not, like, gorily described, but, you know, he does die, and it's a little bit upsettingly described as like, oh, that's a body shutting down, all right. And it just kind of, like, makes the unicorn snap a little bit, and it's very interesting because the unicorn throughout the book has been very consistently characterized as fairly disdainful of things that are mortal and things that can die, and very, not exactly impressed with herself, but just aware of the fact that she is this ethereal, beautiful, ageless being, and that means that she doesn't work the same way as everybody else. You know, it's just how she rolls. But when she sees Lear die, she freezes, and then she does this, like, scream of grief, and it is not pretty. It is very upset. She's learned a bunch of new emotions. All of them are bad. And the thing is, the unicorn has not had the will to fight against the Red Bull this whole time. It's been able to drive her because she really only knows how to run and, like, taunt, and none of that works on this thing. And then she's fucking pissed because this guy, who a very real part of her loved, died for her, and now she's, like, experiencing something she's never experienced before because she's never in her life cared about something that could die. Mm-hmm. So she becomes angry for the first time and drives the Red Bull back, and the Red Bull fucking goes. It does not know how to actually deal with something that is fighting. It only knows how to terrify. Again, it's very sort of eldritch. The Red Bull has these rules that are sort of loosely defined, but one of them is that, like, it's scary as shit, but it won't really, like, wallop you for the most part. Like, it kills Lear, but that's because he gets in its way. Yeah. It doesn't really have a move set. It's just scary as all fuck, and that means when the unicorn gets mad and starts driving it back, it doesn't know how to handle this, and it eventually just kind of turns and just walks into the sea. It just becomes one with the brine. You know, the unicorn's the unicorn again. She's immortal. The Red Bull has been defeated. She's going to be what she is for the rest of her life, but what she is has been changed by the process. Importantly, this is, like, a very clean way to narratively explain, like, why could this unicorn do it when no other unicorn in the world could? Yeah. And it's like, all the other unicorns are incapable of feeling this kind of furious, self-destructive grief. You know, the rage and pain you feel when you lose something you cared about that you could lose. The unicorn has never been able to feel this. No unicorn has, because no unicorn has ever loved anything that could die. And that is why she gains the strength of will to fight back, and that defeats the Red Bull and frees all the other unicorns in a way that none of them could have done. Unicorns don't change. They're stuck in the water, and they're going to be there forever because they cannot become the kind of thing they would need to be to save themselves. But she did.
Too real to function.
Yeah, basically. They are constants in the universe, and that means that if you find a way to trap them, it's going to work forever. So when the story begins, the unicorn is real. She's unaffected by the rules of the storybook world she lives in. The tropes don't matter to her. She'll always be what she is. And then she becomes a fiction. She becomes transformed into the Lady Amalthea an explicitly false identity. Like, it's not just that, oh, she's humans and humans are fake. Like, Lady Amalthea doesn't exist. Her backstory's fake. But the fiction wants to live out the story that she's supposed to. And the unicorn fades into Lady Amalthea's nightmares, and Lady Amalthea just wants to live happily ever after and grow old and die and never remember what she was, and the unicorns will stay trapped. And then Lady Amalthea is destroyed, literally Eurydice style. It's even mentioned that, like, if Lear hadn't looked back, Amalthea probably wouldn't have been, like, completely fucking obliterated the way she was. But he looks back and sees her when she's transforming back to the unicorn, and Amalthea can't handle it and just, whoop, she's gone. And now the unicorn is real again, but she's kind of in this daze. She's, you know, like, waking up. And then Lear dies for the unicorn, and it just snaps her out of it because she's still got enough of the baggage of the story that she was in to care about the fact that this just happened. And she feels something no unicorn has ever felt before, and it lets her win, which is very cool and badass. But the other thing is that, like, it's established very early on in the book that unicorn horns can revive the dead. This is just a thing they can do. They can heal mortal wounds and revive the dead. So the fact that the unicorn was so upset that Lear dies, but also has the ability to just effortlessly bring him back. Like, those two things can coexist. Like, yes, the fact that Lear's death doesn't actually stop her from bringing him back, that's one thing. But the fact that he died at all, that still changed her in a very profound way. In a way that wouldn't have worked before this had happened to her. Because again, if he'd died before she'd given a shit, she'd be like, okay, boop, you're back now. It truly would not have mattered. It only matters to her because she was at one point human enough to care.
Yeah, even if she cared enough to do something about it as just, you know, only being a unicorn, caring enough to do something about it and feel very strong emotions about it is something that is new in the post Lady Amalthea world.
Yeah.
We get the sense from Molly's backstory of, like, unicorns, I mean, granted, all driven out from the world, but have the capacity to simply not give a shit what people think.
Yeah.
And the unicorn has crossed that boundary, has grown past that characterization.
She's become a new kind of thing while still being a unicorn, which is very cool and awesome. And it's also just an interesting little juxtaposition of, like, oh my god, Lear's tragic death has spurred her into taking an action that no unicorn in history has ever done. And then she's going to fix the tragic death and leave. And it's like, oh yeah, both of those, yeah. I mean, like, it's not the fact that he's dead and will be dead forever. It's the fact that he died at all that sucks.
Yeah.
Of course, she heals him and then she basically just leaves without a word. And Lear, who is still pretty fucked up by this whole situation, wants to chase her. And Schmendrick stops him because he's still thinking of this in terms of stories and love and happily ever after. And Schmendrick is like, no, you gotta understand. She's real. She's a story with no ending, happy or sad. She can never belong to anything mortal enough to want her. And Lear does not get it. He's still, this comes up again in the Lost in Adaptation where Dom's like, yeah, Lear does not have as good a time at the end. Like, he doesn't really take it as well. He's, you know, everyone in this book who's a human is very messy in their own way, and Lear is no exception because they're like, Lear, you should just be happy that you loved the unicorn. That's a kind of grace that nobody has, and, like, she brought you back to life, and then she touched you with her horn a second time. She didn't even need to do that. That one was just for you. And Lear's like, that's bullshit. I want my happily ever after. And, like, he doesn't take it very well. And this is a part that just does not make it into the movie, which is, like, Lear is like, I'll spend the rest of my life chasing her. I'll find her someday, maybe, and if not, I'll devote myself to her pursuit. And Schmendrick is like, that is not a good idea, my guy. And also, you just inherited this kingdom of, like, desolate fucked upness and, like, this town that you hate and, like, the other, you know, people who are suffering under Haggard's cruel reign, and now you have to be their good king because that is the deal that you get when you are the prince who defeats the old bad king. And Lear's like, ugh, I guess I'll do that, but I won't enjoy it. And as Schmendrick and Molly are leaving, they run into a disheveled princess escaping from a different story who's like, oh, I managed to escape my evil uncle, and if only someone would help me. And Schmendrick is like, allow me to introduce you to my good friend Prince Lear. He's just over that hill. I send all my princesses to him. You will have a great time, ma'am. And, like, so it's heavily implied that, like, Lear's not out of the hero game just yet, and the fact that he's very upset about the bittersweet ending of his story with this real being that is not conforming to the story that he is, he's gonna be okay. I have heard that there's a sequel that kind of does the, like, wraps up the end of Lear's life, and it's not happy, but, you know, it's fine. It's fine.
That's a bad idea.
That's a bad idea. Yeah, I'm not touching that. I mean, it's a very short story, but yeah.
I do feel like my experience watching this was like they talk to the skeleton character, give him fake wine,
voiced by
and
Odo
he
from
does
DS9.
like the most voice acting in the whole movie. Because also the voice acting in this movie does it absolutely zero favors. It's like Christopher Lee is good.
Yep, Renee Auberjonois.
Jeff Bridges as Lear is not.
No.
It's
Well,
cool that it's
young.
Jeff Bridges, but he's not doing a good job yet. He was young. It's fine. And Amalthea is too ethereal to function.
I like her. I think that Mia Farrow does a good job with Amalthea.
I think so, but
Yeah.
the role is played well, but the problem is that is a role that is very hard to glean anything from.
Yeah.
With that particular portrayal. The skeleton was like, he's vocally animated, like how the butterfly is, but he's not an obnoxious asshole. Like, I loved the skeleton. Skeleton was great.
Skeleton best
That was
boy.
So much voice acting put into that skeleton.
Yeah.
But like after they run off stage and the skeleton's like, oh my god, get the bull, King Haggard, go get him, go get him. It just feels like shit happens, the end.
Yeah.
There's not much of a narrative framework to give a lot of like context behind. You have to read a lot into a glance here or like a solitary gesture there. Whereas in the book, obviously you can get a lot more of that, and they have a more extended ending where they kind of get to debrief a little more thoroughly than in the movie. And Dom talked about that, you just talked about that.
Yep.
But in the movie it really is, and then things happen. And that scene, it just kind of wraps up. The story just decides to end, and then it's over.
Yeah, it doesn't really give you as much to work with, which is unfortunate because I do think the ending of the story is very, like, beautifully bittersweet in a strange way. Because probably the best indicator that the unicorn is in large part back to her old self is that she doesn't really make an effort to, like, comfort any of her mortal companions before she fucks off, but she does a little bit. She appears in their dreams. And this, again, in the movie, it doesn't really look like that. It looks like she just shows up, but in the book, it's explicit that Schmendrick is dreaming, and he dreams that the unicorn comes to him, and they have a little conversation, and she's like, you're a true mage now, what are you gonna do? And he's like, I could go off and be good and help people, I could go off and be evil, and she's like, well, which of those things do you do? And he's like, I'm probably gonna be good because I think you would approve, and she's like, okay, cool. It's just very sweet and cute.
Yeah.
And he's like, will I ever see you again? And she's like, probably not. And he's like, that's okay, I'll carry the beauty of the time we spent together in my heart, etc., etc. And then when he and Lear and Molly wake up, because this is happening while they are sort of taking Lear on his grand tour of his kingdom, which of course, having been stampeded by like 10 million unicorns, is now growing with like 50 springtimes at once. So he's slowly coming around on maybe not hating it forever. But they all wake up, and Schmendrick is like, I saw the unicorn. And I was like, oh my god, me too. And Lear's like, what did she say to you? And Schmendrick is like, oh, I won't share. And Molly, like, we never learn what the unicorn and Molly shared. But clearly she's like, oh, I'll never tell. I'll be dead in my grave before I tell. But then Lear's like, she didn't tell me anything. Do you understand? She didn't say anything. And they're like, oof, that's rough, buddy, but we can't explain to you that's because you were the one she cared about most of all. And it's like, yeah, I also wouldn't understand that. But the fact that the unicorn is, at her core, this inhuman, ethereal being who does not comfort people by her actions, but only by her presence, it kind of comes through in this last bit. It's like, oh, in a kinder world, maybe the unicorn would have actually stayed and been like, I'll spend more time with you. I'll move into a forest nearby so we can hang out. Like, no, she's done with this. It doesn't matter how long she would choose to stick around. It's all the same to her. She's going to be around forever. There's actually, hold on, there's a line somewhere near the end of the book. All right, I know what it is, but I cannot find it specifically. But basically, Lear is like, oh, it's a shame that I didn't get to tell her the last thing I wanted to tell her. I had stuff, and she just kind of left and didn't say anything. And Schmendrick is like, she's going to remember you when men are fairy tales in books written by rabbits, which is basically like the fact that you loved her is going to live with her forever, far longer than you or humans as a species are going to.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's interesting because by the end of the book, like, the unicorn is settling back into sort of the kind of thing she once was, but aware of the fact that she is not the same, and that she's okay with that in a way that she was terrified by at the beginning of the book. And when she appears to Schmendrick in his dreams, she says something that she would have said at the beginning, which is like, men can do nothing that makes any difference, but she's saying it in a way that makes it clear that she does not believe that anymore. Like, if nothing mortals do can make a difference, then Lear's sacrificing himself would not have so fundamentally changed her into this thing.
Yeah.
And she talks about, like, she's been mortal, she is now immortal again, but some part of her remembers what it was to be mortal. She has all these feelings that won't go away, even though there's nothing to be done about them. But ultimately, she's like, no, it's all worth it because there are unicorns in the world again. No sorrow will live in me as long as that joy save one, and I thank you for that too. And this whole sequence basically makes it into the movie unchanged, and it is very sweet. And it produces like a nice, solid ending for the unicorn story in this part of the book, because like her story doesn't end. This thing happened to her, and now she's going to go back to her immortal forest where it will always be springtime, probably. Although she does say she'll try to go home. And Molly and Schmendrick are like, oh, do you think we'll ever see her again? It's like, well, I kind of hope not, because that would mean she couldn't go home for some reason. That would mean she couldn't settle back in.
Yeah.
So hopefully we'll never see her again, because that means she will have settled back into her joyous, eternal life. I have just a couple notes on like the writing of this book, which is part of why I am so not normal about it. I think that the way that this story exposits is incredibly elegant because it really avoids the principle which is commonly known as you know, Bob, which is when two characters who both should by all rights know what's going on will just look at each other and be like, well, as you know, here is a fundamental rule of this story that it's important for the audience to understand so they don't get confused and, tweet at the author or whatever. This book does not do that, and the fact that all of the characters basically know the rules of the world on some level makes this kind of a challenge, because it means the characters will just act according to rules that the audience then has to piece together from their actions, rather than just being told from the outset, here's what's up. So the fact that the rules of the world are familiar tropes the audience is expected to already understand makes a lot of this easy, because a character can just kind of be like, oh, a damsel in distress, and the audience is like, oh, I know what those are. Okay, cool, I get it. A noble prince. Oh, a wicked king. Oh, a band of merry men in the woods. Yeah, I'm up to speed. But then there are these rules that are different from these tropes, and those are the rules of the real immortals, and they are very mythical and like borderline eldritch, but that's true of both the audience's perspective and the mortal protagonist. The only character who does get these rules from the outset is the unicorn, who just, of course, knows them very naturally. And they're often stated in the form of, like, a fact of, like, oh, this is how this works, this is how that works. And the characters around her are like, what? What do you mean? No further explanation, Your Honor, of course. It's a really good way to communicate this information without, for the most part, clunky exposition. Because when a character has to explain something to another character, they will explain it. But if they don't have to explain it, they won't bother, and that kind of leaves the audience to pick up the slack, which works great in the book and is a real challenge in the movie because it means shit will just happen.
Going back all the way to the beginning where I was mentioning the comparison of like the Hobbit versus the Hobbit as animated by Rankin and Bass, it's the kind of thing where if you already know the story, it's very cool to see it presented in an animated form. But going in not knowing that, there are moments where it's like, yes, a gesture here, a look there can mean a bunch if you know what you're looking for. And if you don't, it's like, well, this character's just kind of staring at this other character for 5 seconds.
Yeah.
I don't know what to do with that. And it's xenofiction from the perspective of the unicorn, where there's all this stuff going on and some very complex internality and some I am immortal and I don't really have to worry about stuff, so I don't really think about stuff all that much.
Yeah.
And it's hard to really tell the difference from the outside with the lack of kind of spoken narration. So I can see how being able to read this first and then watch it is like, oh yeah, no, that is really cool. I see what they're doing. They're representing this thing, and it is a representation of the story in an animated form, much more so than it is a retelling, because what I am getting from this detailed diatribe is that you really cannot actually convey this story in an animated form, lacking all of the power of the narration and prose that is woven through the very straightforward but deeply stacked and layered descriptions of how things are and what they are. So I think this, at a certain level, probably gets to the problems that all adaptations face, which is that even though the actual plot, beat for beat, can be pretty similar, the feeling is completely off. And even though I know what happens in the story, I feel like my experience with this was the feeling was completely off. The beginning was really setting up something specific and using like all of these actual paintings and tapestries of unicorns to create a particular tone. And then we jump into the actual body of the movie. And it's like, here's the song from the 40s. I'm harping on the fucking butterfly because it really did pull me out immediately and kept me out for like an hour before we got to kind of the past midpoint. And there's I guess there was the scene with Molly of like, how dare you come to me now? And then again where Haggard's like, do you not know what I'm talking about?
Yep.
Oh, shit, lady, this is really messed up now. I feel like I was watching this and just not getting it. And I think that probably reflects on what they were not able to communicate in this medium no matter what they did. Some of it is maybe some things they included that I think they could have stood to not. But I'm getting the sense from how you're describing it, the writing is very well composed and does a lot. Like the first line of the book is beautiful. That's really, really cool. Describing an imperceptible difference in the shade of white through these very kind of mystical and ethereal terms is a very, very elegant and clever and evocative little piece of writing. And I didn't get any of the evocative in this animated movie.
No, and it's interesting.
Well.
Yeah, it's a shame. I do think that the prose of this book is some of the most beautiful I've ever read. And a little bit of it comes through in the dialogue, because of course the way the characters talk is in large part the way that the story also describes itself. I think in terms of the fact that like you can see this story as xenofiction, with the fact that the way the unicorn sees the world is so out of line with the way that the audience expects the story to play out and the way the characters expect the story to play out. Again, I kept being surprised at how unkind the unicorn was, or it's like, oh, you could have done a nice thing here, but the unicorn doesn't give a shit about that, and the characters just kind of accept that that's how the unicorn works, and we're all just kind of rolling with it. But the scene in the movie that communicates that as best it can is the part where they're escaping Mum Fortuna's carnival, and Schmendrick frees the unicorn, and she goes out and frees all the other animals, and then she frees that harpy. And the thing is, like, the harpy is like, I don't think she says it, but it's like she's saying to the unicorn, I will kill you if you set me free. Set me free. And the unicorn's like, okay. And it's truly just because, like, these are two things that are real, and their rules are different from everyone else. Whether or not you are going to try to kill me, you don't belong in this cage, so I will free you. And then you will try to kill me, and I will try to kill you, and that's kind of how we're going to work on it. And we don't know how that battle would play out, because the harpy gets distracted by murdering Mommy Fortuna instead, and Schmendrick is like, now's our chance! Quick, let's run! And the unicorn says a line which has lived rent-free in my brain since I first saw this movie, even before I read the book and learned it was good. Sorry, that probably came out very mean.
No, that's how I'm feeling this whole time.
Yeah, she says, you must never run from anything immortal. It attracts their attention. That singular line contains so much world building, so many implications. It's so folkloric. It's like on the level of, like, you can lead Eurydice out of the underworld, but you can't look back to see if she's there. It's that kind of thing. It's just like a rule of cause and effect in this universe. If you run from something immortal, it will chase you. It can't help it. They work in a very specific way. So instead, we're just going to walk away from this harpy messily murdering this old lady and pretend like it doesn't bother us. And that's fascinating. That's so fascinating from a world-building standpoint and from a writing standpoint. And just the casualness with which she says this, of like, of course this is how that works. And I really do like that, because it's like, that whole scene, taken from a human perspective, makes no sense. Why would she let out this thing that is a monster, that is terrifying, that actively wants to kill her? And the answer is, well, because neither of them should be in a cage. So it's like, oh, do you think maybe she's going to give mercy on you? No, the harpy immediately tries to attack her, but the harpy is slightly more distracted by attacking something else instead, so they get to get away.
Yeah.
The fact that the unicorn is terrified of aging and changing, but not of being killed, as long as the thing that kills her knows that she's a cool unicorn, like, that really does kind of make her whole character make sense. And there's one other element which I think makes the writing in this book work, which is the fact that the world is extremely weird, but the people who live in it just kind of accept it as home. And again, this circles back to the very first point I was making about self-aware fantasy, because of course self-aware fantasy is often very explicit, comparing itself with the genre mainstays in order to parody them. You have to point and laugh at the conventions of the original in order to make the funny haha parody. So you have to be pointing out, like, this ain't your Grandma Ethel's fairy tale. These aren't Tolkien's elves. These aren't your everyday legendary heroes. And the thing is, every time I see one of those, I'm like, well, maybe I do want Grandma Ethel's fairy tale, or maybe I should reread Lord of the Rings. And
that sounds more fun.
Yeah, maybe I could do that instead. And like, it's a dangerous game to play when you parody something, because what if the thing you're parodying sounds more interesting? It's like, oh, you put in a twist, but what if the untwisty version would have been more compelling? Uh-oh. And the thing is, this isn't always a bad thing. Like, the Discworld series, this is its bread and butter. It started off as a very overt parody of a lot of classic sword and sorcery stuff going on at the same time, and only later developed more of its own internal, like, vibe. But even then, it stayed very parodical. You would still get characters being like, oh, I don't know, Captain, I don't think we want to attack this lone guy who's just kind of standing there grinning. I feel like every time I see a group of masked guards attacking a lone guy who's just standing there grinning, they usually all get their asses beat, and the guy swings on a chandelier, and I just don't really want to deal with that. And they're like, there's not even a chandelier in this room. Like, that kind of shit. That's very standard for Discworld writing. And it's funny, but it's mostly funny because, like, yeah, it would be pretty cool to see someone swing from a chandelier, but this is also good. You're playing a risky game when you're being self-aware and parodical, and this is a story that is self-aware and not really parodical. When a character points out, like, oh, you did this trope, and it's like, no, I left the baby to die. It's not like, oh, well, probably would have been better if you did that trope. It's like, yeah, everyone agrees it probably would have been better if you did the trope instead of leaving a baby to die. Like, maybe the fact that you left a baby to die is fucked up and bad, you know, like, the book agrees with you on that.
Yeah.
So you end up with this situation where the absurdity of the world is incredibly obvious to an outside observer and, you know, even to the characters within, but they're not like, oh, this world is so weird. I would sure like to live in a world that doesn't do that. It's like, man, this world is weird. Anyway, it does a really good job of making the world feel internally, like, sort of enclosed. Like, it's not constantly reaching outside of itself and pointing to other pieces of media and being like, just like that thing, or not like that thing, which is dumb and lame. So it does a very good job of sort of being unapologetically itself, while also being a self-aware fairy tale. And I think this is probably one of the only times I've seen that pulled off.
I'm just imagining a version of the baby with the cats where, like, some townsperson, like waves away the cats, pulls out a gun, shoots the baby, looks to camera and says, huh, ding. Take that.
Not today, writers. But yeah, no, I think that, like, the fact that the world is a fiction and the fiction is absurd, but the characters live in that world and treat it like the world they live in, it makes it so sincere, and that's a large part of what I really like about it. And again, it's part of the prose that kind of doesn't really make it into the movie because it's very hard to capture. That is basically everything I had to say about the book. I will still award it 9 out of 10 only because she's not actually in any way the last unicorn, but that's okay.
I will not be the last Jedi.
Yeah. Amazing. Every word of that sentence was wrong. No, I mean, there's like more I could say about the prose. There's one thing I really liked was how poetic the prose was. You know, normally there's kind of a hard line delineation between those two things, but the entire chapter where the unicorn is trapped in the carnival, the prose is constantly drawing a comparison between, like, the iron bars of the cage she's in, which are bad for her because iron, not good for no creature of the night loves cold iron, says the book. They're constantly drawing a connection between the bars and, like, teeth. It's like, okay, the iron bars are like, they're like teeth. Schmendrick tries to grab them to free her from it, but they bite him. They literally leave bite marks on his hands. Okay, the iron bars are teeth. And by the end of the chapter, they can just say, like, the iron bars grinned at her. And it's like, oh yeah, of course, because the iron bars are teeth. I've seen the poetic connection. They can just say a sentence that on paper makes no fucking sense, but the sense has been drawn in the poetical metaphors around them. And, like, every single thing is like that. It's such a good read, you know, it's a really solid thing to look through, and I think there's a lot of extremely cool shit in there.
Well, I regret that I didn't have the time to read the book first, because my experience with the movie sucked ass, but
Mission
you're convincing me that the book is in fact good.
And the cool thing is, once you've read the book, then the movie can be better, because, like, you can do that thing you were talking about.
Probably substantially better.
Yeah. I think it'll make it easier to pick up on specific things where it's like, oh yeah, that's this actually. That's not just a shot of the unicorn looking contemplative. That translates to 3 whole paragraphs in the book, you know.
I maintain my experience, the truth of my my personal perspective on this, because goddamn, watching this movie by itself was not it. I was talking to Cyan, like, I had to watch Last Unicorn for detailed diatribe with Red, and she's like, oh, I really liked it when I was a kid. I'm like, did you? Why?
If nobody got me, I know Cyan's got me.
But yeah, I mean, I can't say I get it because I haven't read it, but I see the vision. I understand what this story would be like if it were good, and it's not the movie, that's for sure.
Yeah. And
I think I understand conceptually.
Yeah. No, I think that the movie is interesting. It's a very interesting case study in how you can adapt a story and point for point hit almost every important part of it and still not quite capture the sauce that made it work in the first place.
Yeah. I'm coming down on the perspective that storytelling and adaptation is oftentimes a game of get the plot correct, but I feel like what really strikes me is get the vibes correct, because the way that I see stories is it's like vibes stretched over a very thin skeleton of plot, and it's in fact all vibes and nothing else super duper matters. And I'm wondering if it would have been better to adapt this much more abstractly than they did. Obviously they wouldn't have had such a bold take.
Yeah, no, I think the vibes of this book are very specific, and I'm not entirely sure how it could be adapted into a purely visual medium. I do think that, like, if you wanted to capture what this book should look like, it does look like this movie looks like, for the most part. Like, they capture the unicorn in a very ethereal way. They did a very good job of making her look like this game-breakingly beautiful force of nature. There's somebody pointed out that the unicorn is not shaded like everything else around her. She always looks like this sort of luminous pure white, except in the scenes where she's being cowed by the Red Bull, and the light in her horn has gone out, and she kind of just looks like this odd, drab, dingy, weird-looking animal, because unicorns look weird as shit. So it's just, I don't know. I think that aesthetically, a lot of this movie hit it out of the park. It's just the parts that they chose to adapt and the parts that they didn't quite capture the part of the book that makes it hold together as well as it does. And honestly, I wonder if it's an easier watch when you're a kid, when the fact that it is just things happening in an order is less of a game breaker, because as a kid, most things are just things happening in an order. And that might be why a lot of people who watched this when they were little are like, oh yeah, it's really good. And then I rewatched it, and when you rewatch it, you already have the version of the story in your head to build off of, so you're less jarred by things just happening. But no, I think the movie is very beautiful, and I see why it affected so many people, but the book I think is actually transcendently solid in a lot of very real ways. So I would highly recommend people go and read it, including you. But it's okay. This ended up proving my point far better than I could have hoped. Yes, what we have here is a cautionary tale. Yeah, I don't think I have much else to add. I'm feeling very good about this. I'll be honest. I was worried I wasn't going to be able to convince you book good, but apparently the first line was sufficient.
I was willing to be convinced. I just needed to see anything good.
Yeah. No, that's fair. Well, hell yeah. The power of friendship and literary analysis has saved the day yet again. Everyone should go read this book.
Yay.
Okay.
So,
bye.
Then look into the sky where through the clouds a path is formed. Look and see her how she sparkles. It's the last unicorn.